Greetings, YouTube. Not long ago, Ronnie Bradley did a video about post-apocalyptic encounters. And he put forth an interesting point of view, I thought. Ronnie took the position that a post-apocalyptic game isn't so much as science fiction or science fantasy as it is science horror. And that the way to convey the appropriate tone for his type of post-apocalyptic game that he wants to run is to emphasize the horror aspect. And I can definitely see where he's coming from. There's been quite a bit of fiction in the last, 100 years that really has treated the post-apocalyptic setting as horror, as the terror of the world as we know it ending. And a lot of people are attracted to that particular type of post-apocalyptic setting. I'm not one of them. I don't run post-apocalyptic games that take place within the first moments of the apocalypse, or even in the first generation or so. I want the post-apocalyptic settings to be the rebirth, to be the rediscovery, to be the forging ahead of what was left in the aftermath of the old world. I tend to want to have them be far enough in the future so that the technological base that the characters rediscover is very much science fiction. So there's going to be things like robots and powered armor and energy weapons and lightsabers and land speeders and space stations and things like that. So my games are in very big manner, they're high fantasy, but just set in a post-apocalyptic science fiction setting. They're science fantasy, plain and simple. That's why I happen to be such a great fan of Gamma World. And for me, the 1992 version really nailed the exact type of setting I wanted, which was kind of an 18th century base technological level that everyone had come to, and then on top of that was layered the magic items and magic powers of mutations and technological devices. For example, one of my favorite post-apocalyptic novels ever was Andrea Norton's Starman's Son. Was it 2120 AD, I think it was also known as. I'm not positive. An excellent novel. I highly recommend it. And the books in that genre, in that style of writing, is really what got me into the hobby. And of course the game, the original first edition of Gamma World itself, and Metamorphosis Alpha, which I still have both have copies of, the originals. Both of them are in very tough shape. So for me, the encounters are going to really be playing off of that tone, that flavor. In my longest running campaign, Overkill, which I've mentioned here before, where they live, which was the city of New Tau, was very much like the 1940s as far as the technological level. They had a phone system. They had radio station. They were in the process of establishing a television network. Or station, single. And so they were rebuilding. Individual homes had wind generators and solar panels. And the solar panels may have been scavenged from the old world, but the generators were often hand-built from stuff that was available then. It was being made new. They understood the science, and they were applying it. They understood electricity. But you also had the magic things, the robots and the powered armor and the energy weapons. The police were frequently armed with higher tech, non-powered armor, occasionally powered armor for like the SWAT versions, the one people that went into on the sharp pointy end and things went really bad, and things would occasionally go really bad. Oddly enough, the player characters were often involved in those kinds of things. Sometimes they were the cause. So that kind of a thing was what I was playing with. And for me, I would often seed each session with ideas. And I did this by reading the news to the group. I would come up with a list of news items so that they had heard in the newspapers or on the radio, or rumors through the grapevine. Just chit chat, neighbors over the fence kind of thing. And a lot of these are red herrings. They went nowhere, unless, of course, the player characters wanted to follow them, and then I had to create something on the fly. Don't they always do that? Don't the player characters always follow the one thing that you had no plans for, and they ignore the thing that you've plotted out with great detail? Sorry. But that's how I would introduce each session. And there were real plot points in there, and because they were an adventuring group and were essentially problem solvers, that's really what they were. It was film noir detectives kind of thing. People would bring problems to the adventuring party, and they weren't the only adventure group. There were actually numerous adventuring groups in this city. The government actually re-registered and licensed, and ones that weren't registered and licensed were hunted down and eliminated because they were considered nothing more than gangs. But the government recognized that these were going to exist, so they tried to control them as best they could. And so people came to these groups and said, I've got this problem. Can you help me? Because a lot of the time the government was stretched too thin with other issues. So it was a world where the government was probably doing exactly what some of the conservatives in America would like to see, which was a small scale government, and private industry was filling in a lot of the gaps. But in this case, because they were not yet able to establish a coherent government system to cover all of the available needs of society, so that's where the adventuring groups came in. So that's how I got a lot of the ideas in to the thought process of the players. I would use this news of the day, news of the week kind of thing, and then just we'd run with it. And of course, then people would sometimes walk off the street, or there would be a contract. And as they became that needed to be filled, for example, as they became established, some people would hire them because they were well known. And then sometimes they were hired, I remember they were hired specifically by a gallery, because the gallery thought that they could then use the fame and infamy of the Overkill group as a sort of performance art piece in and of itself. And the group didn't know this, at least not initially, that they were being hired not only to do legitimate security for an event, because they were, but that they were also part of the spectacle. So, do you see post-apocalyptic settings as horror? Do you like that grim, gritty survival where people have to grub for food and water, and every bullet has to be cherished? And that survival horror neo-scavenger, which I was introduced to not long ago by Slosh on Sloshworks. That kind of a thing. Alone in the Dark, is that another one? I saw kind of a survival game. It was not post-apocalyptic, or was it Alone in the Dark, or was it Don't Starve? I think it might have been. But yeah, the whole idea that you have to scramble to make it every day. Is that what you like, or do you like more of the 4-color Marvel comic post-apocalyptic futures? Not quite as big as Thunder the Barbarian, perchance, but definitely in the rediscovery, rebuilding milieu of post-apocalyptic, as opposed to the first and second generation where it's hard scrabble horror. So what do you like, and how do you handle your encounters? How do you generate them? Where do you get the inspiration for them? What particular styles? Do you want rad ghouls out there threatening every little settlement, or is it a little more like mutant armies or robot armies threatening civilization? So it's a little more comic book or science fiction film like. I'm interested in knowing, because let's face it, the post-apocalyptic genre is broad. It is able to handle a lot of things. Earth Dawn is an example. Shadowrun is an example. a Gamma World, the Mutant Epoch, there are Aftermath, Morrow Project. There have been a lot of different takes on this, and some of these systems can be used, like for example, the Mutant Epoch could be used in many different ways. You could run that from hardcore to 4-color comic quite easily. It really lends itself to a lot of flexibility. So there's a lot of different versions of what post-apocalyptic means, and how we handle those encounters, I think, is important and interesting, and I would like to discuss it.